On behalf of my co-chair, Martha Gilmore, I am pleased to introduce Dr. David Allen to you. I remember when my colleague, Dr. Jim Steinwaddell, first mentioned that he wanted me to meet a psychiatrist who was doing important group work in the Bahamas. I am forever thankful for that introduction. Dr. Allen has led and trained others to lead innovative, community-based, process-oriented groups that have transformed lives, and he's conducted research on these groups to assess changes in members over time. He's a skilled and creative clinician, a teacher who is committed to mentoring future group leaders, and a researcher whose work has been funded by the Templeton World Charity Foundation. In our article, Adapting Group Therapy to Address Real-World Problems, Insights from Groups Offered in the Bahamas, that was published in the International Journal last year, we describe the family as a supportive, process-oriented, community-based group intervention. The approach is an integration of interpersonally oriented, role-playing, and supportive techniques based on the contemplative discovery pathway theory. I am pleased to share that I, along with several of my students, have had the opportunity to experience his leadership of these groups in the Bahamas. I appreciate your generosity toward me and my students. I mean, after all, someone had to go. Observing Dr. Allen's groups has deepened my appreciation for the power of group as a vehicle not only for individual change, but communal change. When I'm teaching group therapy, my students appreciate the classical approaches to group therapy, but they will ask me, how do we make group offerings more available to the community, particularly those who have limited health care access? Also, they question whether our models of group therapy need to be culturally tailored for certain communities. Dr. Allen, your work has provided me with a vibrant, creative example of this tailoring and increased accessibility. Again, we note in the article that this adaptation can serve as a model for community contexts where there are few mental health professionals, where there's a need to serve a larger number of people, and where there are significant challenges related to community violence and societal fragmentation. Dr. Allen, you are an example of someone who has been well-trained but has never forgotten the community where you grew up. You've literally risked your life to help to transform the Bahamas. We thank you for that. Dr. David Allen was trained in medicine at St. Andrews University in Scotland and in psychiatry and public health at Harvard University in Boston. He is certified by the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology with added qualifications in addiction. Dr. Allen has taught at Harvard, Yale, and most recently held a clinical professorship in psychiatry at Georgetown Medical School in Washington, D.C. Dr. Allen was named a Distinguished Life Fellow of the American Psychiatric Association for his innovative scientific research. He's the author of numerous books, most recently, Shame, the Human Nemesis. Additionally, he's published numerous scientific papers. Dr. Allen is also the director of the Renaissance Institute in Nassau, Bahamas. Welcome, Dr. Allen.
Thank you for this wonderful opportunity of being here and meeting so many interesting and very warm people. I really appreciate being here. Particular thanks to Alexis, who saw me struggling in the Bahamas and came alongside me to help me develop this process. I want to particularly thank her. Thanks also to Irving Yalom. His book, Group Psychotherapy, has been my Bible since residency and my research and work in crack cocaine, and now in this recent project. Tonight's a special privilege for me because I present to you something that is my heart. Since Harvard days, the top of a cone, that third, is well taken care of in Western society. But at the bottom of that cone, there's an infinite number of people, particularly children, who are deeply hurt. A hurt child is a dangerous adult. Don't tell me what you did. Tell me what happened to you. My challenge is that we as colleagues and therapists must now address our mind to that group, because if we don't, they will come for us. Yes, we can change the gun laws. Please do that. But the real gun, the smoking gun, is the hurt child. Our country, the Bahamas, as you know, is a beautiful country. It's an island nation situated between Florida and Cuba. And sadly, in our marginalized areas, we have a severe, powerful social fragmentation process. This is due to the powerful crack cocaine epidemic of the 1980s, which was the first country outside of South America to have a nationwide crack epidemic. I had the opportunity of writing the seminal paper in The Lancet in 1986, heralding this epidemic to the world. And I've seen a drug which I describe brings so much havoc in virtually every nation of the world. So what has happened? The social fragmentation of this particular epidemic is now hitting certain marginalized areas of the Bahamas. And so in 2008, I went back to do another research paper on the epidemic, having done ones in the Archives of General Psychiatry, the Yale Journal of Biology and Medicine, the American Journal of Addictions. But what I found was a spectra of catastrophic social fragmentation. Once pristine neighborhoods were now destroyed. Grime and crime everywhere. Children hopeless. Unemployment rife. And violent gangs just destroying the community. As a result of that, we had burgeoning murder rates, violent crime rates, domestic violence issues, and multiple forms of abuse. But one fact which is really mentioned is that crack cocaine was the first drug that really feminized drug addiction. And as you know, in marginalized areas, whether in this country or South America or the rest of the world, are usually held together by mothers. So when crack cocaine addicted mothers, they were ejected from the home and children were left to fend for themselves. That plus the international economic slowdown in 2008, 2009 meant that these kids came together as gangs, became extremely violent, and terrorized the community. Why the Bahamas is interesting is this. Because it's a small nation, we can do these kind of studies. But the work we do there, just like my work in crack cocaine, transcends to my work in Washington, Boston, and throughout the world, because we have to always follow up an epidemic. But after an epidemic has been in a country for more than 10 to 20 years, you will see serious social fragmentation. For example, this is our murder rate in the Bahamas, mostly in marginalized areas. That's from 1963. I wrote the paper in 1986, but extrapolate 20 years to about 2005, you can see the exponential increase of murder. That's a sign of severe social fragmentation. You go into Chicago, you will find the same thing. You go into Atlanta, you will find the same thing. You go into Detroit, you'll find the same thing. Add to that the multiple school shootings by young kids. Yes, they're dangerous, but they are hurt. They are not destructive acts. They are acts which were never intervened in. The average age of the murder in the Western society is between 16 and 25. Those who do the killing and those who are killed. Having interviewed many of them, none of them had any exposure to mental health. Therefore, it's not an act. It's a non-intervened process. My point is, unless we intervene in that process between 8 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, will wreak the havoc that's being seen in Western society. First of all, when I got into this terrible social fragmentation process, the question was, there's no point doing another study. The question was, could I devise some type of resocialization methodology to deal with this tragic situation? And of course, I had to define social fragmentation. And after much research, I found that the best way to look at it was that social fragmentation simply is a person who is victimized by the negativity of shame, and as a result has a diminished view of themselves, others, as well as their community, and involved in destructive acts. Shame is a powerful mass emotion which we now know forms in a child's life in the early emotional development before cognition. Guilt is I made a mistake, that's cognition. Shame is I am a mistake. So once we miss that early emotional development, we are moving into a situation where the horse is already out of the barn. And so really, shame is the underbelly of love. What I'm saying is these are kids who were unloved, who were unattached. You know all the attachment theory. Your colleagues are the best at it. I'm sure better than us psychiatrists. Shame is usually hidden. It's from a German Indian word which implies hidden. So you don't see shame, you see the faces of shame in society. And in our society, those faces are anger, very prominent, violence, revenge, addiction, grief, and so on. I started with a small group of mothers. They all had lost sons to murder in this very marginalized area. And I was very moved by them. They had a form of grief which represented what I call groaning from the womb. But what struck me more than anything else, that deeply hurt people don't necessarily want what you can give to them, but they want you to stand with them in their pain. And when they realized I was willing to come and sit with them in their communities, and they can point out the alleged murderers of their sons who were on bail, and tell me how they were vulnerable to be killed because they were witnesses to some of them, and that somehow by joining with them, I was too making myself vulnerable. But the point I'm making is this: we either decide to go into the den and deal with the hurt or pain, or be condemned by it. Within a short time, a powerful empathic connection developed among us. That healing bond is what I defined as family. I can't solve the biological family, but what I found is, within a short period of time, they became my mother. I became their son. And all we did was tell our stories. Notice the destigmatization. Families like mother love. Telling a story, all human beings tell stories. They told their stories of shame and pain. I told mine of what it was like for me to come and work in that area, how terrified I was as well. But as our stories came together, using Yalom's work, that which is most personal is also universal. The other thing I found very important was the development of a contemplative environment. What do I mean by that? Each of our groups always starts with a time of contemplative mindfulness, coming home to ourselves, coming to be present. The mind is like a wild horse. It gallops all over the place, past and future. But somehow, where we are so often, we are what's missing. So sitting there to really come home to our presence, to be with ourselves, created a deep sense of openness, a deep sense of love, deep sense of silence, of stillness, a deep sense of acceptance, but mostly non-judgmental listening. My work has found that the quality of the interaction in the group that follows the contemplative mindfulness exercise is directly proportional to the quality of the contemplative mindfulness at the beginning, where we actually breathe in hope and breathe out the shame and the chaos. As time went on, a number of factors developed. For example, within 6 months, the group grew from 7 to 18. Within 1 year, there were 30 people in the group. And as you know from classical group therapy, at least in my training in university, was how do you keep the therapeutic nature of a group going when it hits around 30 people? Well, I found role-playing very helpful, and Bahamians tend to be good actors. Sidney Poitier, Lenny Kravitz, Calvin Lockett, a little bit David Allen maybe. But the idea is we're gamesters, we talk cool, and we're not cool sometimes, even though we're terrified. But they can act out a shame scene in a powerful way. The question or the art was how then to bring that shame scene into their hearts. But role-playing leading to psychodrama was one of the most powerful ways I was able to move the therapeutic process to a wider group. I have groups now up to 50 people. Because remember, I'm fighting against time because we have to reach them. We now have teenage groups. We're developing children's groups. And so I find the concept of play. The meaning of song was particularly important. Song, music absorbs pain. We use the spirituals, that spiritual. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. You felt that. Sometimes I feel like a fatherless child, a long, long way from home. And you stop there and think of home, the place of safety, the place of connection, the place of empowerment. As one lady said, "Doctor, there's a big gap between me and home. In fact, there's a mountain, there's an ocean. I can't go back." Another guy said, "I've had a great life, Doc, but I just can't show up for it. I'm too far away from home." Socially fragmented people have a vision of the home, of the safety, but the sadness is, how do we get there? The fact is, you and I sometimes feel that way as well as we get older. Sometimes in sickness, as one person said to me, a colleague, "David, it took me illness to learn stillness." The point is, at a very deep level, there are no socially fragmented people. We're all people who function at a certain level, and as we get older or ill, we go below that level. We're talking about the human condition. We're talking about our brothers and sisters, our fellow men and our fellow women. And so this became extremely important as we developed the concept, as the resocialization then was a community open process where we told our stories in a contemplative environment using a theory I've been working on for many years called the Contemplative Discovery Pathway Theory. I'll discuss that as we go on. The goal of CDBT, Contemplation Discovery Pathway Therapy, was really to help people to open themselves to their hurt and pain and shame, and as they release it, and nobody releases their shame unless they feel loved. Let me say it again. Nobody, me or you, releases their shame unless they feel loved. Some people come into the group in a very hurt, broken way. Many come in with a very powerful defensive false self. But unless that false self is broken and they can get in touch with that shame and release it, but as they do it, they become liberated from the negativity of shame and experience the positive emotions of love, humility, forgiveness, and, of course, gratitude. After each group, the therapist, the facilitator, does a praxis. A praxis involves writing a discussion of the interaction, but also listing the overt themes, the covert themes, and then a personal reflection of how the group affected them. The key thing for the facilitator and the therapist is to make sure we reach into our own hearts and psyche to feel what's happening to that group. This is a quantitative or qualitative analysis of 776 groups. And you can see the major themes. Number 1, anger. 2, violence. 3, grief. The problem is in social fragmentation, somebody's killed today, you start grieving, but within the next day or so, somebody else is killed. You get aborted grief, and you're back to what? Anger. Then you have intimacy dysfunction, relationship issues, then abuse, and it continues on and on. The interesting thing in our prison groups, Violence now is number one, followed by anger. But the same issues seem to play together. Neuroscience is a major part of us trying to understand what we're doing, and the work of Dr. Daniel Siegel, Dr. Kurt Thompson, the book The Soul of Shame, and Professor David George, Untangling the Human Mind, have been very helpful. But this, to me, says what we're trying to do in the Family People Helping People Project. An important part of how people change is through the process of telling their stories to an empathic listener. When a person tells her story and is truly heard and understood, both they and the listener undergo actual changes in their brain circuitry, through neuroplasticity, of course, and they feel a greater sense of emotional and relational connection, decreased anxiety, and greater awareness of and compassion for others' suffering. That is a pretty simplistic statement of what we actually see in the family. And now briefly to discuss the contemplative discovery pathway. The natural self at birth, after the first 9 months of our life, we're thrown into life. And the instinctual needs can be summed up as safety, survival, security, connection, affection, esteem, and empowerment. And of course, trust. And so representing the love that brought us into this world, because every child coming into the world is looking for somebody else who's looking for them. Sadly, many kids are looking for somebody, but nobody's looking for them. The instinctual needs are not just instinctual needs. They're the stuff in which all our dreams are made of. My belief in age 20, age 30, age 50, age 100, we all still want to know, am I safe? Will I be connected? Will I have some sense of empowerment? Heinz Kohut, whose work I'm on, looked at the safety area, the idea of the mirror transference. The mother smiles at the child smiles back at the mother. And that leads to self-esteem and confidence. And no matter how old we are, we still look for somebody to smile at us. That's all the family is. A place where we could smile at people who have not been loved. And the effect and research shows they rise up in self-esteem. They stop wanting to kill. They want to connect. It's so simple. I can't believe it. And then, of course, the connection. You have, according to Kurt, you have the twinship transference, leading to empathy. And empathy leads to community. Then the empowerment area, you have the idealized transference that leads to respect and honor. And of course, after the love story, the hurt trail starts in our lives, right in our family. Abandonment, and the A's always line up: abandonment, ambivalence, anger, anxiety, addiction. But the sad thing about shame, it's not just an emotion, it's a learned, almost sensed emotion, because it's connected with certain lies. For example, when the dream of safety is shattered, the lie is born: I'm no good. I am not enough. I am hopeless. When the dream of connection is shattered, leading to rejection, the lie is born: I am unlovable. I mean, you hear people say that. Nobody loves me. Nobody wants me. When the dream of empowerment is shattered, leading to humiliation, the lie: I'm a failure. I am helpless. And so the shame self then has not just the feelings connected to shame, but powerful lies which, unaddressed, become almost concretized in a person's life. And of course, shame itself, S self, H hatred, aimed at me. Shame is such a powerful phenomenon for the human psyche or the heart that immediately when shame happens, that deprivation of the instinctual needs leads to a compensation of the defense. So the abandonment is replaced by self-absorption. Using Eckhart Tolle's work, it's like our being, our divine DNA, is joined to our full self, self-absorption, which means I am what I do. I am what I have. I am what I possess. I am what I feel. And then self-gratification, the addiction process, that somehow we get attached. And Scott Peck has taught me addiction is not just drugs, which I know well, but technology, for example. We're connected but disconnected. The family having dinner at McDonald's, the mother and father on their iPhones, the kids on their iPads. They're together, but they're disconnected. My point is, the shame is not only moving to create social fragmentation in marginalized areas, it's also doing the same thing in unmarginalized, wealthy areas. And our work has shown, because I have groups now in very powerful, some of the wealthiest sections of Nassau, and guess what? The shame faces are the same as those in marginalized areas. But people who have means have lawyers, they can get help, and they are not as vulnerable as the poor to suffer. They have people to stand in for them, whereas the poor have no protection. And then control, very powerful phenomenon. But to control anything, you have to lie. Or a better word now is to reconstruct reality. That's more appropriate. But the idea is we split off our shame self and project it onto other people and look down on them or blame them, so we become self-righteous. But I found another type of splitting too, that many times shamed people split off their adequate self and project it onto other people, leaving themselves more shamed and become like a martyr concept. So you control people by splitting off your shame, but you also control by splitting off your adequacy. This is a powerful form of scapegoating. This false self, to me, is the Bermuda Triangle of the soul. When people come in with their shame broken, that's easy. But a very powerfully defended false self is very difficult to deal with the self-gratification, self-absorption, and control, and in the middle, powerful fear and anger. My belief is, at this stage of my career, that unless we dig down deep in our therapy to touch the shame elements in our heart or psyche, instead of moving people on to essential being, we develop more sophisticated false selves. This is happening in psychotherapy, it's happening in education, it's also happening in theology. And of course, as they dig down and open to the shame and release the shame, then they open to love, which is manifested by solitude. Solitude always leads to community, whereas loneliness leads to a crowd. Empathic connection, forgiveness, revenge, elimination, and of course, understanding, humility, and gratitude. A phenomenon which is gathering steam, a paper we just did recently. In this work, you find the artist, the sun in the left and the lightning in the right. The sun is the love story, and of course the lightning indicates the woundedness of life. So that young child is hurt through the social fragmentation, marches down with the anger and sadness, develops a powerful shame self of abandonment, rejection, humiliation, develops a powerful shameful self. But here's what we found. When a person who is shamed already is further shamed, it's like the false self is not big enough to defend against that shame, and they'll go into murderous rage. And as a result of that trigger, they go into what I call the evil, violence, destructive tunnel. We've been able to stage how people actually kill. And we took the paper and gave it to our inmate family. They studied it for 1 month. They said, "Doc, we hate your words, but let's put our words to it." I had cognitive constriction. That's nonsense. It's called being fixated. You got to get the person. Secondly, you get physiological arousal. No, you got to get psych-docked. Then you have emotional dumbing down. No, you just dumb down generally. This is powerful because I talked to a guy who was stabbing a girl, and he thought she was dead. He kept stabbing her. Fortunately, she didn't die. And I said, "Why did you keep stabbing her?" He said, "I wanted her to feel what I was feeling because she was unfaithful to me." "What were you feeling?" "I don't know." The dumbing down. And then the fourth stage is negative energy comes in. The inmate says, "Doc, forget that. The devil gets in. When the devil gets in, it goes crazy." Ethical fragmentation, that's nonsense, Doc. Nothing good's going to happen. Straightforward. And you got to do what you got to do. You either destroy yourself or you destroy the person. But here's what else they said. That after doing the act, like a sine wave, it rises in excitement and then it settles down. And you can just go to sleep. Or you can drive to a restaurant with the body in the back of the car and have a chicken snack. This work has been translated in Spanish, also Chinese. The Russians are looking at it as well. And one police force wrote and said, Doc, forget the rest of your theory. We just want the evil violence tunnel. Because most of our police are in the tunnel. And when we arrest somebody, they're in the tunnel. So it's a double tunnel mess. But a real challenge for us because the inmates say they actually live in the tunnel. And I've lived there since kids. And when you kill once, that's hard. But after you do it 3 times, it's like drinking water. And remember, in the gangs, they use the younger guys to do the killing. You know why? The court process is easier on the young guy. So the kids run to the gang for safety. But like the false self, as Masterson said, it's a perverse rescuer. It promises safety, but destroys them eventually. The gang is now the masculine part of the family in marginalized communities. What we need is a new gang, a gang of love, a gang of therapists who are willing to say, let's go and touch. A gang of somebody who says, let's go and get these hurt children and work with them in love. Because we haven't done that. But we get all freaked out when they shoot, when they kill, when they get in that tunnel. There are many other kids in that tunnel. If we don't get to them, you can take away the guns, you can give people guns, but in that tunnel, they will become destructive. I discussed the stages of discovery, resocialization, awareness, of course, of our shame, listening to our life, confrontation. Unless you confront your pain, it's hard to heal it. Surrender, letting it go, and of course, change versus transition. We find in our work, transition is more appropriate because change means going from room A to room B. But the problem is you can go from room A to room B, but your heart is still in room A. So this happens more by transition. It's like the train to Machu Picchu. It goes up, and down, and eventually the transition takes place. And then there has to be commitment because the true self is a vision. You arrive there, but before you leave the lecture, a thought of negativity, something somebody says to you, and you're right back to your hurt trail or your false self. But you don't stay there because you have the vision of where you can go. The work was very exciting, and of course, it started to get abroad, and the Templeton Foundation heard about it because Professor Andrew Briggs from Oxford, professor of nanotherapy, heard about it because the Prime Minister of England came to the Templeton Foundation and said, look, after the young guys broke up London a few years ago, just destructive, they said, where's the research on community resocialization? There was none. And so Briggs heard about our work, came to Nassau, sat through a few of my families and said, David, I think you got it. But I love your testimonial evidence, but we're a scientific foundation, note the word. I need you to produce this quantitatively. Well, you can imagine the challenge of that. But I did find a group of neuropsychologists in California, and they helped me put together a resocialization scale. We took 9 international scales, very complex, the Beck, the Basteki, gratitude, what have you, plus a base questionnaire. So it was 400 questions. Can you imagine doing that in a marginalized community? The people who could hardly write, or some could hardly talk. But after much struggle, we got the data, and the data showed that people who've been in the family for a year or more, their anger is decreased, their depressions decrease, their violence is decreased, their revenge desires decrease, their loneliness decreases, and abusive relationships decreases, and they have increase in self-esteem and also forgiveness and gratitude. And the work was checked at Harvard with Professor Magnanello and at Yale with Professor Jekyll, saying that we had now been able to produce community resocialization. Just to show you that's anger before the family and afterwards, and then revenge before the family and afterwards. Before the family, violent revenge was less. Before the family, then nonviolent revenge was less after the family. And then, of course, that's important, that before the family, people were suicidal. But after a year in the family, they were less suicidal. This is without drugs. Now, as a psychopharmacologist, this amazed me. Could it be our drug use is because we have not done enough bonding in our group work? What a tremendous challenge for your organization. The less bonded we are, we will then have to medicate more. The less bonded we are, we'll have more crack cocaine and more opiate use. Could it be that this is a challenge for an organization such as this, with such great talent of people who are experts in group dynamics. Vignettes, I'll briefly do this, but it's very important. She came to us, she was incested by her father. 7 daughters incested by the father. None were allowed to go to school. She married a guy who tried to kill her, then she tried to kill him, and when she came to us, she was suicidal. She could not speak. She sat in a family group for 3 months. I see the tears streaming down her face. Then one day I said, "Are you ready to share?" And recognizing the situation, I invited her to come to sit with a therapist and facilitator. But I also asked anybody in the group who would like to sit beside her. So we had 2 concentric circles. The inner circle were those who are going to share the pain, and the outer circle, those who are going to bear the pain. And then through auto-hypnotic suggestion, we do a process simply by saying, "You're now safe. You're home." As they say in the Bahamas, you can break 1 stick, but you can't break 10. Your dad cannot reach you now. We're here for you. You're with your family. So you can let this pain and shame of a lifetime go. And you can see the rhythmic movement of her body as the pain and the shame starts to rise. Come on, you can let it go. You can do it. You can do it. And after 10 minutes, she burst in a massive catharsis of screaming, which lasted for 10 minutes. But what happened was, people in the group who were also abused started screaming as well. And then there was quiet. I've learned something. At that point of the quietness, or the contemplative moment, or what I call presence, it's important to recognize the still point. T.S. Eliot, the still point of the still changing world. The still point simply is the chronological pain, chronos, is intercepted by love. And at that intersection is presence. And we should always respect that. Now, what happens in marginalized communities, when people share pain through catharsis, sometimes they laugh as a defense. But saying, holy moment, still point. So now in the group, you will hear when that point is reached, they themselves would say, holy moment, and go into silence. Silence is the great absorber of our pain, because most of our pain took place when we were silent. And we only get healed when we get back to that silence. So in that silence, in the silence of stillness, we achieve a sense of presence. And the test of presence is always gratitude. Shame always deals with the past, future, present, but gratitude also always brings it present. She's still with us after 8 years. She's a tremendous healer. Our first graduate is a facilitator, and she's helped so many people who have been incested or abused. Another vignette, a young man was kicked out of his family at age 10. Lived on the streets, totally abused. He was shot, his side of his face was shot off, his side was shot off. He was put into hospital. And the second day of being in hospital, the guy who shot him was also shot. That's why it's so horrible in social fragmentation. And he was 2 beds away from him. He said, I wanted to kill him. And then his guy came to the hospital saying, tell us who the shooter is so we can shoot him right here. But he said something I never forget. He said, I just prayed. I don't know if there's a God. But maybe if I save this guy's life, even though he tried to kill me, would you please give me a better life? So he wouldn't tell the gang, and they left. When he left hospital, things got worse for him. He lived in a graveyard, in a tomb, because in socially fragmented, marginalized areas, graveyards are the safest place to live. Now I understand. He lived there for 1 year, but then he came to the family, again quiet for about 2 months, and then he spoke. And he told us the story about the hospital, how he prayed for a day when he'd have a better life. He looked around and said, my prayers answered. I have family. I have a job. I have people who listen to me, who talk to me. And so I thank the family. This Christmas, afterwards, the first family, I said, how was your Christmas? He said, Dr. Allen, for the first time I realized that my happiness is within me. I don't have to go out to be happy anymore. So this Christmas, I did a lot of things alone, and I felt at peace. Notice in the authentic, gracious self, solitude leading to community. She was a tough lady, but her daughter was murdered. I went to the house, as I usually do with members of the family whose children are murdered. And as I was there, I could hear the people saying, you wait till Doc goes and we'll do the revenge. And she said, Doc, I'm tired of revenge. In our community, we kill and they kill and they kill and we kill. It never stops. He said, I want to do something different. I want to do forgiveness. In the group, she has worked on that, and she was the first person in the thematic analysis to see, if I show the latest one, where forgiveness is now burping through, showing resocialization. But then, it's a very sad me, Andre Chappelle. He was my assistant. I treated him at age 15, very wealthy guy, crack cocaine addiction. Got him off many times, very bright person. But he's been around the world for the best treatment centers. But then malignant addiction came in, and he sent it into homelessness and vagrancy. I'd go to see him, and he'd say, Doc, you didn't really fail. You tried to comfort me. It's just that I love cocaine more. When I tasted crack cocaine, it was the key that fit my lock. But somehow he came to the family. It was after Christmas morning, 2 a.m. In 2009, he was sleeping on an empty car park. He said, I felt this intense sense of loneliness, no awareness. And I saw my pain come before me. He'd just seen his niece the day before. She was now 19. He remembered seeing her the last time when she was a few months. And he realized, I've been like this for over 20 years. And somehow he said, he just got on his knees and said, oh God, help me, do something different in my life. He got up and eventually went to his family's lawyer. He got his criminal record expunged. He came to the family, and he became an ardent study, made an ardent study of all my work. He read every single paper I did. He actually wrote his own thesis on the work, and he would use the family. He said, Doc, forget all the stuff you say. It's simple as this. There's two rivers in life. There's the love river, and there's the hurt river. When we come into the world with our heart sponge or our psyche sponge, it absorbs the love. It's beautiful. But what people don't know is, as you get older, you absorb the shame and the hurt. And the shame and hurt in the sponge blocks love from coming in. And so what happens is, you go to addictions. Mine was cocaine. Others will work, like you, Doc. Writing papers, like you, Doc. You have to understand, it's all addiction, Doc. You got to empty your sponge. And the family is a place where you tell your story over and over. And as your sponge empties, love comes back. It's interesting. He was in love with a girl in primary school. In fact, she would write his name Kim Chappelle. After he came to the family and got over his addiction, guess what? The love came back. He said, my sponge was empty and love came in, and they got married. And for 3 years, they had a beautiful life together. Then one night he calls me. He just lived down the street from me. He says, David, something's not right. I don't go to doctors. I've got a pain on my lower left side. Went around, felt it. Sealed a tumor. Said, Andre, you got to get you to the hospital. Inoperable colon cancer. "25 years of homelessness, 3 years of love." You said, Doc, this has been an interesting movie. But I was with him every night, from June to 16 to the time he died, December 17. He taught me about death and dying. He taught me about contemplation, how silence is really important. And he taught me, you have to come to go. Don't come and stay, come to go, Doc. Because realize this, at a certain point, you can't go through what I'm going through. And the last night I saw him, he says, Doc, why are you still psyching me out? Let me psych you out, okay? You don't have a clue what I'm going through. You always, just sit now, let me psych you out. He said, look, this movie is nearly ended, all right? This flick is nearly over. Speak to my memorial. But Doc, it's time to go now. Go to your wife and family. Nice knowing you. But don't stop the family, because it's one of the only places where people can empty the sponge of their heart or their psyche. And Doc, like me, if they don't, the addiction will continue. Addiction to guns, addiction to work. His last paper he wrote, and I bought some copies my daughter has, some of you would like to have his paper, where he wrote and said, peace is not the absence of struggle. He said, on the street, on drugs, I had struggle. Coming off drugs, I had struggle. Getting married, I had more struggle. But he said, peace is not the absence of struggle. It's decreasing the fear and anger in the struggle. And he said, that's what group therapy does. And that's why group is so important, Doc. That's what the family is. Tell people to work. There'll always be a struggle. Whatever you do, wherever you go in this world, there's a veil of tears. But you can work on the anger and the fear and the struggle and come to a sense of peace. The sad thing is, as you come out of your room and the guy in the next car didn't get the message, and he beeps and cuts you off, and you want to kill him. But you don't forget the true self. You go back into the room and contemplate again. He's gone, but he represents the family. Andre, rest in peace. Just his life in the Bahamas is a miracle. Thank you. It's up to you. You come back.
Thank you so much, David. That was so powerful and enlightening. We do have time for some questions.
In the marginalized community, madam, it's so common. And not only that, do you realize in marginalized communities in Chicago, in Detroit, Atlanta, and now in Nassau, and these are testing of post-traumatic stress disorder. They're testing the same as the guys coming back from Afghanistan, because they're seeing the same cruelty in their neighborhoods. But they're 12. All that means is they have murderous rage within them. They have poor impulse control. And in the group of herd instinct, they're killers. And a gun in their hands, they can destroy all of us. They're the teeming numbers. So much so, in Atlanta, they placed a psychiatrist, psychologist in the emergency floor. And not only do they kill the victims, but the post-traumatic disorder, the Beck score, depression, and the anger score is very high. The kids are hurt, and their accident's about to happen. The question is not what you've done, it's what happened to you. Many have been abused terribly, but very little work is being done. And that's the challenge for us as therapists. Madam? In what other ways has spirituality played a factor in my work? Well, it's interesting because, I did my analytic training at Harvard, and the first attempt was to try and analyze my faith out of me. I went through analysis, and it didn't work. But I tried to get away. No, I did get into, I was in the Queen's Physician staff at Guy's Hospital in London. I was pretty good with the stethoscope. So I told my professor, Jack, I'm 300 years of Allen's in the Bahamas, the Puritan people with African descent and some Indians, and I don't think they can analyze my spirituality out of me. It's too deep. And so I said, the best thing, let me leave your psychiatry program. I'll join a medical program. Professor Tullis accepted me in the medical program, put on my stethoscope, put on my white coat. Jack called me back, David, I'm not letting you go from psychiatry. I said, what? No, you're not running away from psychiatry, you're running away from your faith. He was an agnostic. He's dead too. Here am I. And so in those days, I had 3 books. Books for my ethics or philosophy, books for my spirituality, books for my psychiatry. But the new theory, which I've been working with, the contemplative discovery pathway, involves positive psychology, psychopathology, contemplative spirituality, and social action. So I've tried to bring one, and so this is a culmination of my work. But I was a goner to psychiatry, but I'm still there. So yes, regardless whether you're spiritual, what I do, some people can't say God or high power. I just say the sun rose this morning and it set this afternoon. I had nothing to do with it, and neither did you. So if you feel hopeless, there's a power bigger than you and one bigger than me. I have no control. Do you want to work?
One more question.
This is a work in process. But I believe at the end of my career, getting at that bottom of the cone, whether the kids in Syria, the kids in China, the kids in Africa, the kids in your own country, the kids in South America. I don't think our collective mind has been applied to this. So I ask you to come, enjoy the beach of the Bahamas, to spend some time coming to the family and help me develop this work. We have students now coming as interns. Some of the younger students are really finding this interesting. But if any of you would like to come and visit the program, I'd be more than happy to entertain you and give you a real nice time. Barry, you can still play tennis on the in Paradise Island. And you don't play with the net down anymore, do you?